Are these? Yes, they are. Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so welcome everyone to the final seminar in our series, The Water and Human Security Consequences of Modern Armed Conflict and Warfare. This series has been co-convened by the Institute for Security Studies, the Geneva Water Hub, Economist Impact, and the International Water Management Institute. Today's session is titled Water in Warfare, Crafting Economic Resilience and Sustainability. My name is Dr. Sandra Ruxtel. I'm a senior researcher at the International Water Management Institute and the co-convener of the CGIAR Fragility, Conflict, and Migration Initiative. So I will be the chair of today's seminar, and we're really thrilled to have you all here today. As we bring this series to a close. Yesterday we had two seminars that delved into the complex intersection of water security, human security, and armed conflict. Today we will build on that knowledge to explore how we can develop economic resilience and sustainability in these challenging contexts. So, to help us prepare for this next step in the discussion, I'd like to invite Dr. Caroline Pelleton, Operations Director of the Geneva Water Hub, to provide a quick recap of the discussions that we had yesterday. Over to you. Feel free to move my stuff.
Thank you, Sandra. I'm really thrilled on behalf of the co-conveners to be able to present this recap from the first two sessions of this important seminar on water and armed conflict implications for human security. We've been discussing that since Sunday, but fresh water is vital for human development and a sustainable future. But it's increasingly threatened by climate change, population growth, pollution, overuse, and conflicts. These issues, by straining water resources, can lead to social and political instability, affecting human security. Poor water management and the destruction of water infrastructures during conflict worsen instability, especially in fragile areas where socio-economic inequalities are already present. In particular, armed conflict disrupts water systems in diverse ways, with negative consequences reaching from basic service provision to development efforts. The impact of armed conflicts on water and other essential services, such as healthcare, sanitation, energy, education, is severe and poses grave immediate and long-term humanitarian, development, and environmental challenges. In the grim theater of war, water often becomes a victim. And when water is weaponized, when reservoirs and distribution networks are disrupted, when water is polluted, the repercussions echo long after hostilities have ceased. We live in a world where there are more than 120 armed conflicts, international and non-international, and more than 180 million people suffering from the destruction, damage, or misuse of water, making them more vulnerable to outbreak of waterborne diseases such as cholera. And we just have to look at the news, especially what's happening now in Gaza, to see how conflicts and the misuse of water creates dire situations for civilians. And UNICEF reminds us poignantly that children under 5 years old are 20 times more likely to die from the consequences of drinking unsafe water than from the conflict itself. Protecting water during armed conflict isn't just about delivery in quantity and quality, but it's about survival, food security, livelihood, health, and human dignity. It needs to be addressed from a local to a regional perspective, as conflict coupled to climate change and displacement can also significantly alter the basin-scale water balance, with potentially important ramifications for water users in the basin. For example, displaced people in one region will no longer do agriculture, but will take refuge in another country and resettle, imposing an increasing demand on the water resources. And one example can be seen in Jordan, where the influx of Syrian refugees in host communities increased the water demand, creating tensions between the communities and the refugees, but as well between the communities and the water authorities. So as we see, the reverberating effects extend far beyond the conflict zone and linger long after the dust settles. As the humanitarian needs are growing, we must look at improving overall the resilience of water systems to facilitate recovery. Addressing these challenges not only eases the burden on civilian populations, but also paves the way for enduring peace, stability, reconciliation, and development. And by sparing water from armed conflict, peace can prevail. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. So, if I can wake my computer up. Okay, so, all right, so now in today's session, we're going to dive a bit deeper into the how. Now, what do I mean by the how? I mean that how can we promote water resilience and climate resilience even in the midst of conflict, in these extremely, in the most difficult operating situations and living situations. So this session will offer insights into innovative, proactive measures, partnerships, and multi-sector approaches that can be implemented to secure water resources and to bolster economic resilience. We'll hear from a series of experts who will provide examples of real-world strategies for managing water resources and promoting resilience in conflict settings. These examples will demonstrate how various sectors can work together to develop adaptive, resilient water management systems that not only withstand the pressures of conflict, but which can also contribute to long-term sustainability and peace. Ideally. We will explore practical applications of these strategies, consider how they have been successfully implemented to support economic stability and to enhance resilience in conflict-affected regions. So after our speakers are finished, we will have a Q&A segment, so please stay and stay tuned, where we can engage directly with our panel of experts. This will be your opportunity to ask questions, also to share your own stories and to contribute to a deeper dialogue that's critical to learning on these issues. So we'll aim to create a collaborative environment, okay, open to all stories, all experiences here, to develop practical solutions and to inform each other's practice. We have a lot we can learn from each other, that's for sure, which is why we've brought such a diverse group together. So I'd like to say let's work together and ensure that even in the face of conflict, we can build a more resilient future in these situations, or at least do our best to contribute to that mission. So now I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Mark Smith, General Director of the International Water Management Institute. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sandy. And thanks to the organizing team for the opportunity and to help frame the discussions that are coming up. I also wanted to add my thanks to those of Sandy, to our co-conveners for this session from the Institute of Security Studies, the Geneva Water Hub, and Economist Impact. And by 2030, nearly 60% of the world's extreme poor will live in affected countries. So the focus of global efforts to reduce poverty, feed the hungry, build resilience to climate change, and therefore also to solve water problems, is going to be increasingly in these very complex contexts. And this is one reason why we at IMI, we're both increasingly being asked to address water security in fragile and conflict-affected situations, but also why we're bringing on board researchers with the expertise and experience to do so, including those in the organizing team behind this today's session. We often say at Stockholm and in the water community that water connects, and therefore it's important for everything. We often say that water connects, and this is without doubt true in the complex, in the complex of problems that are confronting fragile and conflict-affected situations. Water connects poverty, health, hunger, and fragility. And it's because of these interconnections that, for example, in armed conflict situations, they are sometimes described as development in reverse. So consider, in that context, basic human survival, human rights, and dignity. Water is a fundamental necessity for drinking and cooking and sanitation, while in conflict zones, the denial of or destruction of water infrastructure is often used as a weapon of war. In Yemen, for example, the conflict has led to the destruction of nearly 50% of the country's water infrastructure, leaving millions without reliable access to clean water. In relation to public health, clean water and proper sanitation are key to preventing waterborne diseases such as cholera, diarrhea, typhoid, and especially so in crowded refugee camps or in congested urban areas with damaged infrastructure. And according to UNICEF, and Caroline just now used the same statistic, but it's worth repeating because it's so shocking. According to UNICEF, in areas of conflict, children under 15 are almost 3 times more likely to die from, that's my son on the phone, excuse me, are almost 3 times more likely to die from diseases related to unsafe water than from direct conflict. And for children under 5, as Caroline said, that figure is over 20 times more likely to die from diarrheal disease from unsafe water than from direct violence. For food security, water, of course, is vital for agriculture, and agriculture is often the principal source of income and food in fragile areas. But also, severe food insecurity, which is estimated will affect more than 950 million people by 2028, is twice as prevalent in fragility, conflict, and violence-affected countries. And so on. Disruption related to water contributes to economic instability, ecosystem degradation, and breakdown of social cohesion, in addition to that list of things that I just gave, in that process of development in reverse. Water security then needs to be at the heart of our strategies for both humanitarian response and development in fragile and conflict-affected settings, because it's a vital means of therefore protecting those development gains that those losses were so linked to. It's a vital means of protecting those development gains that are at risk because of water. And unfortunately, the news in relation to water security is not great. There are many pressures on water security, and climate change, we know, is deepening risks and making water security harder to achieve, and nowhere more so than in these kinds of contexts. Water risks and extremes, as we know and we talk about here at Stockholm every year, is intensifying climate change as it supercharges the water cycle, increasing the frequency and severity of floods and droughts and affecting the availability of water because of shifting monsoons, etc. We know that story. But we're seeing the results of these changes. Among the almost 47 million new internal displacements that were registered in 2023, some 56% were triggered by disasters. And by 2050, more than 216 million people could be internally displaced by water-related hazards such as droughts and floods. And in response, focus is increasingly on solutions that take a landscapes approach, so work across water, energy, food, and ecosystems. But this, of course, is not something that the humanitarian sector is used to doing. So a key challenge for us to consider, and most certainly today in this session, is how then do we develop solutions that will work across both humanitarian response and sustainable development solutions in relation to water. So all at once, water is one of the first action areas in humanitarian response and a vital component of sustainable development strategies as well as climate action. And in the context of fragility, conflict, and violence, water therefore naturally sits within this humanitarian development nexus and can be managed for both ends, for both objectives, for both short-term and long-term resilience and development. At IMI, to help us do so, to help us take on that challenge, we're now working with humanitarian organizations, and especially so, particularly over the last 2 years perhaps. We're now working with humanitarian organizations in ways that we had not done so before, to build those links between humanitarian and developed action. And this is science-based action, what we call at IMI bringing science to difficult places. So in Jordan, for example, which of course is a country that hosts large refugee communities and is facing rapid landscape changes, we're leading the Jahez project to build climate resilience for both refugees and their host communities. Over the coming 3 years, and with financial support from FCDO and in partnership with the UK Met Office, we'll be working with Jordanian authorities and humanitarian organizations on improving disaster risk management, enhancing water and agricultural practices, and restoring natural landscapes. With funding from the Norwegian government, IMI researchers have collaborated with the World Food Programme to generate knowledge that directly guides their work on the ground. In the Somali region of Ethiopia, for example, we worked with WFP to co-design a resilience program that uses nature-based solutions to help displaced people and host communities manage their vulnerabilities from floods and droughts. Also in Ethiopia, IMI researchers worked with UNHCR to facilitate a shift towards decentralized and adaptive governments, and so helping to reduce those communities' dependencies on humanitarian aids. We identified key areas for improving water security, including new solutions for water harvesting and protecting infrastructure, and recommended strategies to the UNHCR for climate adaptation, such as identifying new water sources and integrating local enterprises into water systems. So an example then of optimizing humanitarian assistance and enabling evidence-driven policy and practice that link that then to development pathways. In a final example I want to share, which I find really compelling, we've been working in partnership with the World Food Programme also to implement an accelerator for scaling innovations in fragile and conflict-affected areas. The accelerator provides grants to businesses along with technical assistance, so something we're used to talking about in maybe more conventional development contexts, but this is in really fragile contexts. So providing grants to businesses along with technical assistance from IMI, as well as the broader CGIAR network of scientists, to help them develop the products and services that they've been developing as innovations. So in Jordan, the accelerator supports a hydroponics farm installer to enhance food security in refugee and host communities. In Nigeria, we're supporting an innovation called Coolbox, which is an off-grid cooling solution for farmers in conflict-affected areas that lack electricity. In Kenya, we collaborate with an entity called Conflict Forecast, a data solutions provider that is analyzing armed conflict data to inform resource allocation, including how you allocate water. So I said at the outset that the 1.5 billion people living in regions affected by fragility, conflict, and violence are faced with a complex knot of vulnerabilities that are a huge challenge for not just them, but all of us, all of the world, a huge challenge for us to untangle. And it's because of these interconnected complexities that fragility, conflict, and violence can put development into reverse, costing communities and countries their development gains. And water insecurity is at the heart of this complex tangle of development losses. But water management and building water security, therefore, in these contexts, is then a means of protecting development gains. So the need we face as a water community here in Stockholm that I think is starting a new dialogue around how we engage with these kinds of topics. The need that we face as a water community is to work across that humanitarian development nexus for both the short term, water as a first action area, and long-term resilience and development. At IMI, we're taking on this challenge increasingly and in partnerships alongside humanitarian development organizations to bring science into difficult places. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from the panel, which is the next segment we're going to go into, and learning more about how we can all do that better as we take on these challenges. So thank you very much. Over to Sandy.
Thank you very much for that. Not a small order, a tall order, but one that I think we've got a very diverse panel, as I said before, that's joined us, rather round table. It's not so much a panel. I'd like to invite Ingrid Timbo, the Deputy Executive Director of AGWA, who is going to facilitate this roundtable discussion. And I'm here if you need help with microphones. Thank you. Over to you, Ingrid.
Thanks, Sandy. Thanks, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. So before we move into this next section, I just want to take the opportunity to congratulate Mark and his team at IMI on their new strategy that was just released earlier this year. You got to hear a little bit about it. I think it's really excellent. I also love in it that it talks about deep uncertainty and it talks about non-stationarity, which is a very nerdy thing. I have never found that in another organization strategy, and I really enjoy that, but that's what you get when you work with researchers and academics. So congratulations, Mark, and the rest of your colleagues at IMI. As Sandy mentioned, my name is Ingrid Timbo. I work for an organization called the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, and it is my honor to join you all this afternoon for the third session in this three-session seminar. So I am going to ask the two panelists. We have a hybrid panel, so we have folks that are here in the room, and then we also have folks online. So if we could bring up all of our panelists right now to join me on stage. And the way that this is going to work is we're going to do a couple rounds of questions. So I've got 2 questions for each. We'll do 1 round of questions, and then the next round, and then we will open it up to questions from the audience. So, Salome, Callist, if you'd like to join me on stage. And then I don't know if we can bring up our 3 panelists on the screen as well. So I will introduce everyone all at once, if possible. But I'll start with the folks in the room. So next to me, I have Salome Gaber from IMI. She's a senior researcher. We have Dr. Kalis Tindimugaya from the Ugandan, he's a commissioner for water resources planning and regulation with the Ministry of Water and Environment in Uganda. And then online, we have Andrew Harper, who is the climate advisor to the High Commissioner at the UN High Commission on Refugees. And then we have got Shambhavi Priyam, who's an economist with the World Bank. And finally, we have Dr. Saadi Ali from the Palestinian Water Authority, who's going to try and join us in person for some of these questions, but his connection is not great, so we also have pre-recorded answers if he is not able to speak live. All right, so we're going to start with Dr. Tindimugaya. So the first question to you is, in Uganda, how has your ministry addressed the challenges of water security in areas affected by internal conflict or cross-border tensions? And can you share a specific example where your interventions help stabilize water access in such regions?
Thank you very much for having me. Yes, indeed, Uganda hosts a number of refugees, so we are having a situation where we have to deal with emergencies, to provide services to the refugees. And of course, we have been having refugees that come from surrounding countries, South Sudan, DR Congo. But of course, we have also been having refugees that are really climate related. But whenever refugees come to the country, then we resettle them, we provide them services, and we have had situations where these services, for example, water services, are provided during an emergency mode, and we have had a number of sources being constructed in small locations where we have had, for example, boreholes being drilled and pumped. You find that you pump one borehole and dry a number of other boreholes. We have also had sanitation facilities being constructed very, very close to the water sources. But also, as the refugees come, in Uganda, of course, we use firewood for cooking. So we have had a lot of environmental degradation, cutting of trees for firewood, cutting of trees also for construction of the different facilities. So there has been really rampant environmental degradation and pollution of water resources and of exploitation of water resources. But also have had settlements being set up in locations which are prone to flooding. So sometimes people are settled, then after a short while, then people are actually being displaced. So we have decided that, I think as has already even been mentioned in the keynote, that we need now to look at how we improve water security, so that we provide water for drinking as a starting point, because again, water is needed for different purposes. We provide sanitation facilities, but also make sure that the water doesn't become a problem. In areas where the water is too much, of course, then you find the refugees are being displaced. So we have, again, employed a landscape approach. We have employed a catchment approach, because even when you have, for example, refugee settlement, what happens there may come from very far. So we have delineated the country in two catchments, and around refugee settlements we have delineated micro-catchments. So we're actually developing micro-catchment management plans where we look at the needs of the refugees. For example, if they need water services, where can we get the water from? And how can we ensure that that water becomes available in a sustainable way, in the right quantity and quality? But we have also looked at how we protect those sources so that they can continue delivering the services. That's why environmental degradation is addressed. We have had tree planting in those areas actually promoted. And we are involving the host communities and the refugees to work together. We have also created coordination structures so that, again, people can work together. Within Uganda, we do believe that government institutions have over time been taking responsibility alone, and in humanitarian settings, humanitarian agencies have been taking action alone, but there hasn't been much collaboration. So we are opening up space to get the civil society to work with the local governments, the refugees themselves, the government institution at the central level, private sector, and of course actors in the humanitarian setting. And we are also trying to bridge the gap between the humanitarian agencies and the development actors. And we are now also ensuring that whatever we do is following government processes. One example I can give, and of course in northwestern Uganda, in West Nile, we have had situations where a number of areas have depended on water being trucked. You are using a lot of money to actually get water from very far, so that we can meet the needs of the refugees. So we have integrated water supply projects with livelihood improvement activities, so that the refugees can actually engage in activities that will give them income, but also keep them busy, because oftentimes they are dependent on getting services without actually them doing anything. So we have tried to bring them on board. So in there, We have brought services. We have a program that has been supported by the World Bank and the government, where we have brought people, we have brought water to the refugees, but we have looked also at ensuring that the host communities get services. We are putting in place livelihood improvement activities and also catchment protection activities. Tree planting, for example, is being done. We are restoring wetlands. We are harvesting the water, and through that we are stabilizing the situation and also ensuring that the conflicts that have traditionally existed between the host communities and refugees are brought down. Of course, we are in initial stages, so I can't say that we have had a lot of success, but that's the direction we are taking as a country. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's wonderful to hear about. What I hear you generally saying is you're really taking kind of systems approaches, right, to the management, not only of ecosystems, of looking at landscapes and catchments, but also in terms of ensuring that there's buy-in within, between the refugees and also the communities, the host communities as well, and then the national government and donors as well. So that's really interesting and encouraging to hear about. So we can follow up in the second question. I'm now going to turn to Andrew Harper, who is online, to ask a question. Andrew, can you hear us okay?
Yep, I can hear you fine.
Perfect. Okay, so my first question for you is, given your work with refugees and displaced populations, how does UNHCR navigate the complexities of ensuring water security in refugee camps or conflict-affected areas? And can you share a specific example of a successful intervention?
Okay, thanks. And what I'll probably do is just actually refer to Uganda as an example, some of the challenges that we've got, because it's no use just coming from a UNHCR perspective or from a northern or foreign perspective. You have to look at what is the situation that is being faced by the countries who are hosting refugees. And so if you look at Uganda, it's not just 10,000 people that have crossed, or 20,000 people, or 100,000 people, or 250,000 people. It's 1.5 million people who've crossed into Uganda. So when we say, how do we manage it? We're like, you can't manage effectively such a strain on a national resource, on an essential resource, using humanitarian response. So if you talk about resilience, if you talk about adaptation, if you talk about sustainability, it's all about development. It's all about working with governments and communities to come up with answers. If you just come up with okay, this is what the UN agency is going to do, this is what some NGOs are going to do, we're going to do this micro project to take lots of photos, then you're going to fail. And this is what the world is doing at the moment. We're failing across the board, because countries like Uganda, countries like Kenya, countries like Chad, countries like South Sudan, who are hosting millions upon millions of people, are not receiving the support in order to manage their most critical resource. And the minister, the director mentioned the environment. Water is required to protect the environment. Water is required to protect people. So we need to be investing not in just a humanitarian response to keep people alive, which we're also failing to do. You need to be investing in a long-term strategy which fits with the government. And we need to be bringing on board entities such as CGIR, who can then inform the larger climate financing institutions to say, this is why money needs to be going to Uganda. This is why money needs to be going to Chad. This is why money needs to be going to places like Jordan. And it's great having Jordan as example, but like I was the representative in Jordan, I was humanitarian coordinator in Jordan. I know Jordan, but Jordan is almost the low-hanging fruit. It's a stable country, easy access. It's well supported by Western countries. What are we doing in a place like Chad, which has received about 700,000 people, and our overall funding situation is, I think it's about 9%. So we can't even do the very basics, let alone put in place the proper management systems. And there are, like, everyone is aware of the systems that are required. We can't continue on with the way we're doing things because we don't value water. We don't value the environment. And as a consequence, it is wasted. We need to be investing in education. We need to be investing in not only bringing up water, but ensuring that the water gets to those people who need it most. We need to be making sure that water is available to families in order that women and girls and boys don't have to travel kilometers after kilometers and put themselves at risk. Investing in water systems will reduce sexual assault. Investing in water systems will allow children to go to school because they don't have this opportunity of cost of having to go and search for water. But if you're looking for examples of best practices, it's always tinged. We've done a lot of hydro surveying work with partners in the Sahel. We know, again, through work with CGIAR and others, that the availability of water in the Sahel is going to reduce. We've even seen from the World Bank report that I think by 2099, the amount of water per capita, potable water per capita, in Africa is going to reduce by something like 67%. So we're on a road to complete meltdown if we just say the current systems are adequate and the current ways of functioning are adequate. No, they're not. And the first thing is we have to value water. We have to value the environment. So there's plenty of things which we can do. Again, working with scientists, working with data, also anticipating where places will be habitable in the future. Again, we often sort of look at those places which are accessible. But what about Mali? What about Burkina Faso? What about parts of Niger? What will be their situations in the future? How will we get programs and projects in those areas? So it's about community participation. It's about community empowerment. And again, it may not necessarily be the leaders that we have to always be sort of reverting back to because it's easy. They can speak English, they can travel. No, that's not the answer. We need to be talking to the women, the elderly, the children, and going to the back of the tent and asking, okay, how can we make your life much more effective? So data and modeling, super important. We must also be looking at how we can solarize systems, moving away from, let's say, diesel-powered generators. But again, there's always another side to it. So Yemen, very successful in use of solar-powered water pumps. But the problem is that they're so successful that they're draining the aquifers. So it goes back again to the question of valuing water and making sure it's managed. Providing a solar water power pump is not the answer. Providing a management system for water and making sure that water is used in a way which is most in need is super important.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much, Advisor Harper. I fully agree that we need to do a better job of valuing water and valuing the environment. And something that I actually admire about Uganda in their nationally determined contribution, or NDC, under the Paris Agreement, is they prioritize water and they prioritize wetlands in it, which is extremely important. So that's another example of how we need to do things differently. Going to our third speaker, we'd like to see if Dr. Sadi Ali, Dr. Sadi, I don't know if you can hear us or if you're able to give your answer live, but the question is, given the unique challenges of water scarcity, challenges to water service provision, and conflict in the West Bank and Gaza, can you share innovative examples of strategies that have been implemented to promote water security in Palestinian communities, and how have these initiatives managed to succeed despite deeply complex and political and logistical hurdles? We'll give him a second.
First, I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to participate in this important session. I was supposed to be here as a member in the scientific committee for the Water Week. However, I couldn't travel due to the ongoing war. I'm not going to talk about this war more in this session, but I'm sure a lot of talks ongoing here in this conference, and you heard a lot from the TV channels and the social media. Specifically, the consequences of this war in the population, in particular for the displaced, more than 1.5 million people have been displaced many times under bombing And you can imagine the severe water services and sanitation where those people are living with a very minimum quantity of water, not exceeding sometimes 3 liters. And also they are surrounded with sewage and solid waste accumulated either in the site, in the camps, or surrounding the camps. While we are struggling to have our independence and moving ahead to build our state, by utilizing all these local expertise in Palestine or abroad. I'm not just to give you 2 examples, successful examples where to answer your question directly. One for the water and one for the wastewater. The water, we managed to build a water supply system depending on one main carrier transporting only the desalinated water and distribute this desalinated water to the blending reservoir, where those reservoirs receive other resources from either imported water from Israel or from the groundwater, which is the main water supply, which is the main source for water supply system. By introducing this system, we're achieving reduced capital investment. We reduce the pumping cost. We provide equitable water for every citizen in Gaza from north to the south, and we reduce the non-revenue water. The second example is collecting under this water category, collecting the sewage in the North Gaza in one treatment plant. After being treated, infiltrating, this is naturally through infiltration basin to the aquifer, keeping this water at least 6 months to handle the viruses and the microorganisms. And this is recover this water back for irrigation purpose. And this is actually will have an important achievement, specifically using the aquifer as a big storage. And this will reduce the capital investment and the operational cost. Recovered water will break the psychological and the social impact, because this is coming directly from the aquifer. It is not from a treatment plant. This will provide a sustainable source over the year to the agricultural irrigation unrestricted crops. So by having this all, this is exactly just 2 examples for this strategic planning achievement. Thank you.
Very much, Dr. Sadi, and the idea of using aquifers for storage is something that we're doing in a lot of countries actually now, and it's great to hear that that is something that is even able to be utilized in somewhere like Gaza, which only has one primary aquifer. So next I want to turn to Dr. Shambhavi Priyam from the World Bank. My question to you, so you're an economist, so from your economic perspective, how have you seen active conflicts impact water security in regions in which you've worked? And in particular, I know that you've worked on, for example, Lebanon's CCDR, and that water is a priority sector there. I wonder if you might want to speak to that at all. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Ingrid. I hope my voice is clear. As you said, my work is primarily focused on economics of water security in Middle East and North Africa. And here we observe that active conflict is impacting water in 3 major ways. The economic cost of conflict from water-scarce populations, the direct impact of water infrastructure damage, and the forced displacement, particularly for who moves and who gets left behind. And recurrent protracted conflict discourages investments and decimates a country's ability to rebuild its economy and institutions. This has resulted in the per capita income in Afghanistan, which has barely changed since 1970. And when this happens, it's not uncommon for households to take up practices in income substitution, which is also something we know is happening to a certain degree in Lebanon. That means that from their limited pool of resources, they would choose between clean water and other necessities like food and energy. Some of my work also takes place in Yemen, where we see that from the outset of the war, when a lot of basic infrastructure was destroyed, there's been a slow annual rise in energy, which is promising, but this still does not translate into basic livelihood improvements. And that's possibly happening because there is still limited access to clean and safe water in this already severely water scarce environment. Um, More directly, though, in across Middle East and North Africa, we see that there's been direct impact of water infrastructure damage, which has already been mentioned previously in this session. And particularly for Libya, Syria, and Yemen alone, we see that since 2011, there have been up to 180 instances of intentional targeting of water infrastructure. So, in addition to water being like basically a cause of conflict, it also ends up becoming a casualty of conflict. And finally, the impact of war on water security is most crucial for those who get displaced by war, but also for those who get left behind. In Yemen, for example, and in MENA more generally, our studies suggest that it's usually not the poorest who end up moving because they just cannot afford to do so. And that suggests that it's not usually the people who are like working to their maximal capacity for improving the infrastructure and access to water that are left behind in these constrained environments. So they're unable to improve their access for hygiene facilities and end up like having being prone to more health impacts, and they end up getting further and further stuck in the cycle of poverty. So there's multiple facets in which we see the economic cost of these conflicts really manifest for a large variety of people in this region.
Thank you, Dr. Priyam, for a very, very direct response, and for bringing in kind of the economic perspective and thinking about not only the folks who are forced to move, but those who are then left behind, and how to better manage security for those folks who remain in conflict-affected areas like Gaza. So, to our final panelist for round one, Dr. Salome Gebrez-Gaber from IMI. In your research on water management and circular economy in refugee camps, what have you found to be the most significant challenges in promoting sustainable water use, and how have you overcome them in your fieldwork?
Yeah, thank you, Ingrid. Well, at IMI, we started working in circular economy several years ago, initially focusing more on the urban and peri-urban areas, later on expanding our work to refugee hosting landscapes. And we worked, for example, in 6 refugee camps and settlements in Kenya, Uganda, and Ethiopia. And these are the 3 top countries which are hosting large number of refugees, as you have heard from previous speakers. Now, most refugee camps are often located in degraded and dryland zones where there is acute shortage of water. So for the refugee camp managers and also the humanitarian actors, their top priority is water supply for domestic use. Any agricultural activity is limited to the rainy season, as productive use of water is not very well encouraged. So the question for us was, can we adapt some of the circular economy solutions, such as safe reuse of grey water for home gardening and agroforestry, as well as use of existing resources, such as biomass, for recovering different products, such as compost or charcoal briquettes for cooking, especially with the deforestation that has been mentioned also from the previous speakers. Refugees, they depend on firewood, where it's resulting in deforestation. So To implement this, we have had challenges. There are some challenges which are cutting across the three countries, but each challenge is different to a specific country. So for Kenya, for example, there was a lot of reception, good reception from the authorities in charge of the refugee camp, or even from the county government, as well as from UNHCR and UN Habitat in these regenerative practices. However, when implementing some of the refugees, it was difficult to get grey water itself, because as it is, they are struggling to get enough water for domestic use. So based on sphere standards, refugees are supposed to get some 15 to 20 liters of water per capita per day. And in some cases, especially in Kakuma and Kalubi in Turkana County in Kenya, this was not achieved. So which means the generation of wastewater or grey water is also very limited, which also affects the piloting or implementation of this nature-based or circular economy solution. So that is technical challenge. Then when you go to Ethiopia, the challenge was more of governance and institutional challenges. It was difficult to get buy-in of the authorities who are in charge of the refugee camps, like the government or regional government. And this is due to partly frequent change in leadership turnover. And then you had to convince the new leadership, and then in few months they changed. So it took a lot of time. And in the meantime, also there was war everywhere in Ethiopia in 2020 to 2022. And due to security reasons, we were not able to implement some of our activities. So our implementing partner at the time, ADRA, their office was hit by a bullet, so they had to vacate. So in conclusion, some of these challenges, they are technical, others are more of governance and security aspects. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I mean, I think it is important to highlight the things you're talking about in terms of circular economy and this idea of kind of co-benefits potentially of the interventions, right? So maybe not only just for water security or for food security, but also potentially for overall reduction of emissions and things like these sorts of things. But as you say, there are challenges that need to be considered when you're doing the planning, whether they're technical or related to governance, that we all must consider. All right, so I want to go back to Dr. Sadi, who is actually with us, I believe, now in person. Welcome, Dr. Sadi. I want to ask you one other question. And that is, how has multi-sector collaboration between government entities, NGOs, and other international organizations contributed to promoting water security in the West Bank and Gaza during times of conflict?
Thank you very much, and I'm happy that I managed now to activate the video. And certainly, without this cooperation between the government agencies and international organizations, especially with major funding agencies such as the bank, the European Union, the German Development Bank, and most of European development agencies active in the water sector in Palestine. Without this, PWP will not be able and would not be able to build those strategic plans and make these important programs in the water sector. Maybe you are aware, and there were more than $1.5 billion were provided over the past 10 years to build this vital infrastructure, including 3 wastewater treatment plants with a capacity of 100,000 cubic meter, 3 desalination plants with a capacity of 36,000 cubic meter, main water wells, pumping station, and pipelines, including all these distribution systems. And this is actually helped a lot in improving the services in both West Bank and in Gaza. Unfortunately, in Gaza, most of the achieved infrastructure and built facilities, they were affected badly and negatively during the last war. More than 50% of those infrastructure, they were either completely damaged or severely damaged, including the 3 wastewater and 1 desalination which now is out of service. Unfortunately, this has resulted in severe environmental and health situation, specifically of those people who are displaced and living in the random camps. I believe this collaboration was also playing an important role during the war, where the Palestinian Water Authority managed to make the response action plan with donors and with the local partners and international NGOs and local NGOs and other ministries. And now we are in having this plan in 3 stages: the immediate needs, and then the second, intermediate, and the reconstruction. We are at the first stage, which is the immediate need, where we need to make sure that we have all the partners involved, at least to maintain the minimum services, including providing minimum amount of fresh water, disposing sewage, at least reasonably. I can't take, I'm sure you have seen in the TVs how the people just float, living in where the septic tank just flowing between the tenants and in the surrounded with solid waste. This is really a very difficult situation. And I believe this cooperation with international NGOs and UN agencies, including UNICEF and UNRWA, has played an important role. But unfortunately, this is up to this moment is not sufficient. And you remember I can tell you that this cooperation has played an important role, especially to put pressure in the SIWI side to restore the micro water in the south and in the middle in November 2023, and managed to restore the micro water in the north in May. So you can see that this cooperation together, making pressure on the Israeli side, this need to be continued in order to be able to make the maintenance needed, at least now during the war, and then we need to maintain this cooperation in order to reconstruct and rebuild what has been done there. However, without having collectively and all the international community should work hardly and seriously to stop this war, because this is without stopping this war and finding a solution for the Palestinian conflict, this cannot be achieved, and no one will be living in peace and security. Thank you.
Thank you, shukran jazilan, Dr. Sadi, and thank you for highlighting another component that we haven't talked about as much so far, but partnerships and their importance, especially in reconstruction phases as well. And so having those partnerships already in place, hopefully can help once reconstruction begins to help move that along faster, and already having those strategies in place can assist in that phase as well. And I think we all hope that is something, inshallah, that begins very soon for you and for your fellow countrymen in Gaza. To our next speaker, I want to go back to Dr. Tindimugaya to talk again about Uganda. So Uganda faces environmental pressure on its water resources in locations hosting refugees fleeing conflict, as we've already discussed. How has the ministry integrated conflict sensitivity into its water management policies? And I think you were getting to this a little bit at the end of your last statement in thinking about kind of how the interactions between refugee populations and also the host areas, how has that been going so far?
Okay, thank you again. Uganda has a comprehensive refugee response framework, and this is coordinated under the Office of the Prime Minister, and the Office of the Prime Minister works very, very closely with the UNHCR. But sectors are required to develop response plans. So from the water and environment perspective, we have developed a water and environment response plan which has addressed issues of water supply, sanitation. We're also looking at water for production. We are looking at water resources management, and we're also looking at environmental management. So we are saying that whatever is done within refugee settings should actually follow a development approach. So we are actually linking the humanitarian and development approaches together, and we are utilizing the government frameworks. Within that framework, for example, we realize that even in emergency situations, of course, you are providing services in emergency mode, but many of these refugees are not going away. Many have actually stayed for many years, and many might actually not go back. So we are now designing systems following government procedures, standards, and this is where now the humanitarian agencies are working with the government institutions and development stakeholders to ensure that the systems that are put in place are well designed and implemented. Operation and maintenance of these systems has been a challenge, and UNHCR and its partners have actually struggled to maintain even these water supply and sanitation systems. So right now we are transitioning from humanitarian to development, long-term operation and maintenance, and these systems are now being taken over by utilities run by government. Now, with respect to the planning, we are also promoting the integrated planning. Right now we are actually guiding on where location for new settlements will be set up, so that even as new refugees come on board, but we are also identifying those locations which are sensitive, fragile ecosystems for protection, but those will be locations also where water resources will actually be protected, where water resources will be filtered. So again, within the framework of the Water and Environment Refugee Response Plan, we are looking at the short, medium, and long term. And through that arrangement, we have also created stakeholder coordination structures at the national level, at the regional level, and the local level. And again, we are ensuring that whatever is done is actually done bearing in mind sustainability, also bearing in mind that we need to improve the resilience. And that's why I also mentioned that we're also trying to make sure that the livelihoods of the refugees are improved. Instead of refugees receiving handouts, right now we are creating opportunities for them to actually do income-generating activities, and we want them to also start paying for the services the way those communities actually are doing. Thank
They
you.
have a stake in,
Yes, indeed.
in the continued services they're receiving. That's really interesting. And again, I think it comes back to a theme we've heard multiple times, including from Mark earlier on, about the linking the human and development approaches, and also this idea of short, medium, and long-term planning. And so looking ahead to see how you can best prepare areas in the event that they do have to receive refugees, for example. So I want to turn back to Dr. Priyam again from the World Bank and ask, how have you addressed the challenges of implementing water security initiatives in conflict-affected areas? And can you give one example that has proven effective in maintaining project momentum despite ongoing conflict?
Yeah, thank you, Ingrid. That's a super important question, and especially given the panel that we have here. And for the World Bank, it has been critical to continue our partnership and rebuilding efforts in FCV, fragile conflict and well-inspected areas. Our country engagement with Yemen is a great example of doing this. Our main focus has been to continue rehabilitation efforts to ensure sustainable supply of safe water beyond the initial emergency support. And here, what was already mentioned by Mark and Dr. Tinimagaya about the adoption of a landscape area-based approach to help prioritization of these, so the scale-up of these initiatives has been something that's been critical to our program. I cannot emphasize enough how important it has been for us to maintain partnerships at all levels. Systematic partnerships with organizations like UNOPS and UNICEF have ensured that there's enhanced impact of our projects. And in the absence of our own boots on the ground, we've also scaled up our engagement with civil society organizations, and specifically for third-party monitoring, and continued our partnership with regional organizations as well to ensure there's sustainability of our initiatives. Strategies that have worked well for our operations in Yemen include enhanced use of operational flexibilities within our organization, while still maintaining a close eye on monitoring and evaluation. Our partners at the UN can attest to our frequent need for updating and collaborating with local level technical professionals who are much more aware of what's happening on the ground than we are. Most importantly, we have had a tremendous focus on sustainability of our operations. And this is why we want to ensure that local level institutions that have taken charge of water management in Yemen, even before the conflict, we want to maintain that they remain intact. And we aim to continue our collaborations with these partners because the cost of losing them and rebuilding, as Dr. Saadi Ali already mentioned in West Bank and Gaza, is too high. So it's important for us to make sure that we do not lose these institutions in the first place. That's all for me. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for, again, reinforcing this idea of partnerships and also prioritization and kind of sorting those things out in advance as well. Dr. Gebrezgabir, one more question for you. How has your work at IMI contributed to building local capacity for water management in conflict-affected or refugee-receiving areas? And again, any specific training or capacity-building initiatives you've been involved in that have actually seen a long-lasting impact?
So I will focus on our work in East Africa again, specifically in Uganda and Kenya. So in these countries, we worked in 4 refugee camps. We were not able to make an impact in Ethiopia due to the reasons I mentioned previously. So looking at the refugee camps, they are very limited in resources: water, land, fertile land, firewood. So in these settings, the idea is, one, to use available resources which are limited. And the resources, when I say resources, we are focusing on waste. So how can we implement regenerative practices such as safe reuse of grey water within those refugee camps? And in spite of the harsh conditions, we have seen successful home gardens being implemented in those settings. So we collaborated with the Danish Refugee Council as well as UNHCR in those camps, where we trained more than 3,000 households in these regenerative practices. And we included also the refugees and host communities. Specifically in Uganda, they have a regulation where whatever implementation you bring it has to be 70-30%, so you don't leave behind the host communities, which are also exposed to the same kind of issues. So in these refugee camps, one of the key definitions for us in terms of scaling is, it's not about the size of the land, but we defined it in terms of the number of households that we were able to reach. So in this case, the smaller the better, because these grey water home gardens are established within the home state of these refugee camps and host communities. In host communities, there are lands that could be used to do larger scale home gardens or even at watershed level. But within the refugee camps, we were able to, for example, some of the refugees, they were interested also to go to commercial business. So it wasn't in our plan, for example, to give them training on financial literacy, but through their request, DRC was able to give them training on financial literacy, especially on the briquette business, because there is huge market for charcoal briquettes. So some women were requesting for additional funding if they can go beyond their household consumption to scale it to business. So the impact, we can't say that we have made an impact at this point, because to measure impact you need time. But through our monitoring and evaluation, we were happy to see that after post-training, 80% of the households are implementing at least one of the regenerative practices that they were trained on. So in this case, the regenerative practices are not implemented in silos. So it's within the same homestead. We trained them in all the regenerative practices like grey water reuse for home gardening or use of biomass for charcoal briquettes for household cooking. So in phase 2, hopefully, what we are thinking about is how do we finance this kind of businesses so that it becomes not only for their own home consumption, but also to create livelihoods. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much for that really tangible example. And so we're going to close out my question section, again going back to Advisor Andrew Harper for this final question. So we've talked a little bit about climate change and its impact, but I'm wondering if you could specifically speak to how you have integrated climate adaptation strategies into UNHCR's work. I know that UNHCR has a new strategic framework for climate action, so I'd be interested to hear about that and what innovative approaches you've employed to enhance water and climate resilience.
Thanks. I think what's key is, again, the issue of adaptation and resilience, moving away from a humanitarian response to something which is much longer term, which involves development actors, involves peace and security, and most importantly, involves the government and the communities. So while it may not be so innovative, what is probably innovative is the engagement of thought leaders, centers of excellence, such as CGIR, in providing us with information on what will be the future landscape in these areas. As we've said numerous times, disasters are being prompted by too much water, too little water, or dirty water. So on top of that, you've got heat, which is also going to exacerbate either the lack of water or the ability of crops to survive. And so there's a whole series of, let's say, modeling efforts that we're doing in order to help us advocate for countries, including Uganda and Kenya and Ethiopia and Jordan and others, advocate to vertical climate funds to the World Bank, to the African Development Bank and others, to get money to support adaptation. So it's nice looking just at a refugee camp and saying, okay, how do we provide sufficient water to the population? You need to look at the overall community which is protecting those refugees. A similar situation in Jordan. It wasn't necessarily that there was a lack of water. What there was a lack of proper management of the water. I think many of the pipes in Jordan and Mafraq and elsewhere, they actually dated back to the late 60s. And so 50% of the water was being lost. So we need to be looking at redevelopment of water systems and water management. Another element that we've been engaged in is much more investment in early warning. As we know, there's going to be much more frequent and severe weather shocks coming through. And we've just seen it recently in Port Sudan situation with the flooding which led to the dam collapse. So we're working with the World Meteorological Organization, who are providing us with daily updates in terms of what we should be expecting in areas which are where refugees are located. So these are the types of things we're trying to do. We're trying to look at using that data to unlock climate financing to support the communities that are protecting refugees. I think the Green Climate Fund is changed the way in which it works. It's much more engaged in fragile and conflict-affected settings. We've been working very closely with the World Bank now for a number of years on it with a joint data center. So this type of collaboration, community, in order to enhance our overall understanding of what will be the threats coming not only now but in the future, is probably the key example of where we're trying to then influence. Another example would be we helped the IGAD region come up with probably Africa's first regional adaptation plan for climate change. Again, this had a regional approach, and it was to not only come up with scenarios, but it was also to look at best practices which came from the region, which could then be provided to funding agencies to support. So this is the type of thing that we're looking to do, leverage partners in order to better protect the refugees. Over.
Thank you, Mr. Harper, for that and for those very concrete examples that you provided, and working with organizations like CGIAR, like WMO, and others to help protect the long-term development of these communities. So I've had the privilege of asking lots of questions, and I have to turn it back over to the chairs in a minute, but I was hoping to at least get one question in from the audience before we wrap up this full seminar series. So does anyone have a burning question that they would like to ask? Okay. And please do introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Yasser Mohammed from Sudan. And I have been attracted by the title of the session, I mean, water in armed conflicts, because I came from Sudan and where there is ongoing armed conflicts now. But we have seen different kinds of water issues related to conflicts. For example, he mentioned those refugees. I mean, because of the armed conflicts, people moved out and then created some pressure to some societies there. And that is more related to the available capacity, and that's more linked to that, like humanitarian kind of water supply or humanitarian wash. So it's clear, the problem is clear, and the solution is clear. The other example mentioned about these climate shocks of drought or floods, which themselves they can create conflicts around the water sources, and how to address that. So it seems that there is different kind of, she mentioned also, it's also very difficult to provide water services within the armed conflicts because of security issues. So it seems to be different kind of issues related to which needs also different approaches. If they can reflect more on that.
Sure, so maybe this idea of maybe short-term shocks versus long-term stressors, whether they be conflict or climate or these sorts of things, how do you do things, how do you engage differently, maybe, would be the question. And who, I can go to the two in the room first, and then we can go online.
Yeah, let me give an example of also in Ethiopia, in northern part, Tigray, where the region was under blockade for 2 years due to civil war. And one of the ways that these people recovered during conflict was to shorten the supply chain. So, and they did that through urban agriculture, for example. So I'm interested in regenerative practices. So my focus goes to that naturally. And another thing that we have seen is that decentralized water systems work best when there is conflict, because everything is shortened. And we have seen that emergence of decentralized systems and also informal water suppliers have been booming in Tigray, which was not the case previously. It has positives, but it has also negatives, because if you have informal sector where it is not regulated, it also impacts the way water is abstracted, the way it is also supplied to the needy. So there is a tendency of commodification of water, which is in conflict with SDG 6, where people who are able to pay, they can get access. So we are seeing that. So it's important to understand during conflict, certain things change, and how do we measure the positives and negatives so that we come out with something that could work, and that could also be used as an anticipatory action to protect against those shocks. Yeah.
Yes, maybe just to supplement on what you have said. Of course, as you said, those situations, of course, will require different approaches. If it is an emergency situation, you are trying to save lives, you don't actually have time even to plan. And that's why we appreciate the work that has always been done, but now we're in a situation where we can plan better. Otherwise, water tracking was the common practice, because you didn't even have time to even drill a borehole. You needed to save lives. So situation like that, as you have said, will require different approaches. But there are things I think we can learn and recognize that as we move forward, we need probably to see how we can put in place systems that can stand the test of time, knowing that some of these, for example, displaced people, refugees, are going to stay for a long time. Thank you.
Anyone online want to take that as well?
Yes, I just want to allow me one of the major lessons from the ongoing war in Gaza and conflict. We believe local solutions in the small scale are more efficient during the war and conflict. And I can give one example. We were, according to the law, small wells, householder wells, they were not allowed. But I can tell you, those small wells, 3 horsepower, they play a significant role providing local people by water, where they can you energize them with the BVs just up to 3-4 kilowatt, which is simple. So I believe this kind of solutions, this kind of infrastructure, even it is very light, can be really providing a very good and efficient local solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Advisor Harper.
I think what's also key is that every situation is different. And so you have to look at what fits the particularly in a conflict situation where access is going to be challenging and the ability to implement and monitor may not exist. And so in those sort of situations, you have to give responsibility and trust that the community will implement according to what is best for their community. But that being said, the world is changing, and the areas which have currently got water may not have water in the future. So the power dynamics is going to significantly change. The relationship between communities, between herders and farmers, between countries is going to change. The gender dimension is going to become even more pronounced if it's going to become more challenging for women who often go collect water and girls. So we have to be looking at working from the ground, looking at what will be the challenges of an evolving water situation. But that's, when I say evolving, it's basically a deteriorating water situation, and sort of see how do communities feel that they will survive in the future. It was also very quickly as well, we can't just look at one community as a whole. If you look at just take interviewing the men, they'll have a different vision in terms of what they want the water for compared to what women and children will have. So we have to be able to be prepared to, again, break down the users and make sure that the most vulnerable people also have access to water, and they're in a position of where their power dynamics is not eroded over.
Thank you. Dr. Priyam, did you also want to come in?
Sure. I think a lot has already been said from the points I had, but just to add to the complexities, there's climate change, and that is not going to stop anytime in the near future. And like we said, we have to be adaptable. We have to be flexible to whatever situations there might be in these different country settings. A focus on infrastructure is important. A focus on institution building and partnerships is, as we've heard from this panel already, is crucial. But something I wanted to touch upon was the value of collecting good information from these conflict areas that can help inform the decisions that we make as well. And this will differ from context to context. So as long as we have mechanisms of collecting these good information, I think we can make informed decisions. Thank you. Over to you, Ingrid.
Thank you. Well, I have learned a lot in this panel discussion, so I'm very pleased. And I know, you don't want to kind of, I guess, paper over that we're talking about really, really challenging and difficult situations. But hopefully what you've heard from these experts here today is that there are ways that we can move forward. We can continue to forge partnerships and relationships with communities and regions that are undergoing stress, conflict, war, who are receiving refugees, that's not a reason to say that we can't do this work anymore. We have to keep going. And obviously we pray for the end of war and we pray for peace, but where there is conflict, we can help improve water security for the people who are there on the ground. So I just want to say thank you very much to our 5 panelists today for this really inspiring discussion, and I will turn it back over to Sandy, I believe, and the co-chairs, to Desigan from the session number 1 to give us a summary of the seminar series this week. And thank you again to the co-organizers.
Thank you, panel. Colleagues, we did not have the heart to stop that discussion. And we all wish we had more time to engage. So I'm going to be really brief and say a few words on behalf of the Scientific Program Committee and the co-conveners. We've had 3 incredible sessions this week. But more than that, we've had a couple of months of incredible conversation in the planning up to this week. In fact, if we could package those discussions and publish it somewhere, I think people will derive some incredible benefit. We've unpacked a very difficult subject at a very difficult time, and I think you know this. The notion of armed conflict is front of mind in everybody's eyes. And it affects every single thing that we do every single day currently. And hopefully by the time this gathering happens again next year, it will be less intense. But we are in a world at war. And the reflections that have come out this week have been particularly innovative, because we haven't dwelled on the challenge of the current situation only. We did reflect on it, and we reflect on it in a very frank way. Some of it in this session. The session has actually been polite compared to the other 2 around engaging the analysis of the current conflicts in the world. But the particular innovation has been, how do you use this incredibly desperate situation in the world? And it's not new, because we've been fighting over a number of things for the longest time. How do you use that notion of this pickle of the conflict to in fact organize to be in a better place? How do we organize to have the relationships that are built during this conflict around the resistance to that armed conflict in order to be the seed of the partnerships that we need around more sustainable water and sanitation solutions going forward? And I believe we have found those. The additional element that Dr. Sadi Ali put on the table is the issue of post-conflict reconstruction. And it is my hope, and I know many of the other people as well, that Gaza and the West Bank will be the recipient of one of the most powerful post-reconstruction conflict programs in history. It needs a Marshall Plan. We all need to be part of it. And this is also true for the Ukraine. It is true for the Sudan. It is true for Ethiopia and many other conflict regions all over the world. So colleagues, we are on that brink. And I want to end on that very positive note, that the adversity that we are engaging must help us to fine-tune our innovation around how we can go leaps and bounds into the future, because 2030 is around the corner. We want to hit that SDG. And one of the things that I want to quote from one of the other panels is that it's not only conflict that we're dealing with. In one of the presentations, there was a discussion about the notion of a toxic triangle. We've talked about 2 parts of that, around conflict and climate change, and the third one is corruption. We have a big job. This is the community of practice. They're going to put our best foot forward. And maybe once again in human history, water can lead the way. So thank you to all of you for this process, for your participation, the co-conveners. A special word to one person, and that's Ludmila, who has kept us together. She's our young water professional.
who's had the hardest job, herding the cats that are the co-conveners of the seminar. Brilliantly done. Thanks to SIWI, and thanks to the government of Sweden for hosting us. I hope they're going to do that again and again and again, but we'll see about that. And thanks to all of you for your participation. Fantastic. Thank you.